and it's an honor and privilege to deliver the prestigious Madam Kumud Tamaskar oration. And my sincere and heartfelt thanks to Dr. Alka, Dr. Ashish Kubde and the whole team of NOGS for bestowing me with this honor of delivering this prestigious oration. As already has been said that Madam was very passionate about the infertility, and hence the topic chosen is infertility, and for all the gynecologists, instead of having an IVF topic, we are speaking about the stimulation protocols for non-IVF cycles. We all know the causes of fertility, and ovarian dysfunction accounts for 21% of the causes for female infertility. So what should be our clinical approach towards ovulation induction? It first and foremost requires the understanding to the cause for anovulation. And the four most common ovulatory disorders include PCOS, hypogonadotrophic hypogonadism, primary ovarian insufficiency and hyperprolactinemia. So whenever we want to do ovulation induction, we have the goal of inducing monofollicular rather than multifollicular development. We want monoovulation. We also want a singleton pregnancy and a birth of a healthy newborn. So with these goals in mind, what are the general principles of ovulation induction? Remember, the induction you have to choose based upon these criteria, that is what is the cause of anovulation, the drugs which you are choosing, you should understand the efficacy, the cost, the risk of those drugs, the patient burden of those drugs and the potential complications associated with each method as they apply to the individual woman. And I always take a chance to show this slide about the preconception counseling, because we all gynecologists who are doing infertility practice, we are in a position to offer preconception counseling to all these women before we start the fertility treatment. Do we have an ideal ovulation induction drug? And what I mean by ideal drug? It has to be by oral route. It should require minimal monitoring of cycle, should not have any hostile effect on endometrium and cervical mucus. It should give you best possible ovulation rate and pregnancy rate, and it should have minimal risk of OHSS and multiple pregnancy. So friends, we don't have an ideal stimulation drug, but there are various stimulation protocols which we all can use for non-IVF cycle, and that is clomiphene, letrozole, CC plus gonadotropins, letrozole plus gonadotropins, gonadotropins standalone and gonadotropins and stimulation. For all the stimulation protocols, remember the basic mantra, then you have to start your stimulation in the early follicular phase, because the recruitment of the follicle takes place in the early follicular phase, and in the late follicular phase only the recruited follicle grows in size. Clomiphene, we all know, is the first line drug since last 55 years. Simple to use, cost effective, has got fewer complications and fewer side effects. But remember, when we are choosing clomiphene, some amount of endogenous estrogen is necessary for a response to clomiphene, and women with PCO do produce estrogen. Women who are hypoestrogenic, they are unlikely to respond, that is those with hypogonadotrophic amenorrhea or primary ovarian insufficiency, they are not going to respond to your clomiphene stimulation. Pre-treatment evaluation is must. You should be sure of ovulatory dysfunction before you start ovulation induction, and these are various tests by which you can confirm that this woman is suffering from ovulatory dysfunction. Disorders of pituitary, adrenal, thyroid origin that can cause anovulation, they should be excluded prior to the initiation of therapy, as targeted treatment of these endocrinopathies can result in normal ovulation without resorting to the ovulation induction protocol. Complete history and physical examination is must. Semen analysis of the partner is also must. A transvaginal ultrasound should be done. Role of HSG or tubal patency is there. When you should do the tubal patency test, if the clinical history suggests uterine or tubal pathology may also be present in women over 35 years of age to avoid ineffective treatment when fertility is in decline. In women with no risk factors for tubal disease, the HSG can be postponed, but it should be performed if women have not conceived after 3 ovulatory cycles. Ovarian reserve test, yes, as Dr. Chaitanya Shembekar has already highlighted, that age, AMH and AFC. If you combine all three together, it will give you a very good assessment as far as ovarian reserve is concerned. CC should be started from day 2. What dose? Normally it is started with a 50 milligram and you can go on increasing the dose. The maximum dose given is 150 milligram. Failure of ovulation is clomiphene resistance and failure of pregnancy despite ovulation is clomiphene failure. Now when to stop the clomiphene citrate? The American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists has suggested that clomiphene treatment should be limited to fewer than 12 cycles and that the number of gonadotropin cycles should be minimized as well. Further evaluation and or a change in therapy for women who do not conceive after 3 to 6 ovulatory CC cycle is recommended. Monitoring, we all know that basal body temperature we don't use, but nowadays make it a habit of doing the urine LH kits, which patients find it very friendly and they can monitor the oral ovulation cycles at their home. Is USG monitoring necessary when you are using clomiphene and letrozole? See, the RCOG and NICE suggest that serial TVS to monitor the number and size of developing follicles and to time SCD administration if necessary, not compulsory for all the cycles. However, adding USG monitoring is costly and does not appear to improve the pregnancy rate significantly. So now let us come and see the ovulation and pregnancy rates in the clomiphene citrate. There is an ovulatory rate of 80%, but a cumulative pregnancy rate is 30 to 40%. Of those who ovulate, approximately 50% they do so at a dose of 50 milligram and another 20 to 25% at 100 milligram and 10% women they do ovulate at 150 milligram. There is no benefit of increasing the dose of clomiphene beyond 150 milligram. And why pregnancy rate is so low as compared to the ovulation rate? Because we all know the anti-estrogenic effect of clomiphene on the uterus, cervix and vagina. So, do we have some strategies to prevent the thin endometrium? Yes, we don't have a miracle drug, but you all can try starting half dose of clomiphene, that is 25 milligram. You can start from day 1 instead of day 2 of the cycle. The ovulatory rate goes down with increasing age, increasing BMI, insulin resistance and free androgen index. After 6 months of treatment, the pregnancy rate per cycle falls substantially despite regular ovulation. The incidence of miscarriage and congenital anomalies appears to be similar to that in spontaneous pregnancies, and remember the risk of OHSS with CC is less than 1%. Effect of clomiphene on cervical mucus are conflicting. In a meta-analysis, a detrimental effect was seen only when the dose exceeded more than 100 mg per day. Clomiphene has no apparent progestational, corticotropic, androgenic or anti-androgenic effects, nor does it interfere with adrenal or thyroid functions. What about the perinatal outcome when you are using clomiphene citrate? Studies suggest that the frequencies of congenital malformations and spontaneous abortions are not increased in pregnancies after clomiphene therapy. And there does not appear to be an increase in the cancer risk in the children who conceived using your ovulation induction drugs. Common side effects are there with clomiphene citrate, but they are not dose related as they can occur at even your starting dose of 50 mg per day. The use of clomiphene citrate for ovulation induction does not appear to be associated with an excess risk of ovarian or breast cancer. Now coming to the letrozole, we all know that letrozole is superior to clomiphene. It is typically administered at 2.5 to 7.5 milligram daily, and dose can be adjusted in an increment of 2.5 milligram. Advantages are many over clomiphene citrate. The cumulative live birth rate was higher in the letrozole group in this study, and the cumulative ovulation rate was also higher with letrozole as compared to the clomiphene citrate. A randomized trial and a meta-analysis of 14 trials in nearly 3,000 anovulatory women with PCO suggests that letrozole therapy results in higher live birth rate as compared to the clomiphene therapy. This was another meta-analysis published in 2018, which also showed the superiority of letrozole over clomiphene citrate. For women who have BMI of more than 30, the cumulative live birth rate was significantly higher with letrozole when it was compared to clomiphene citrate. And what about the outcomes? The American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists has published revised recommendations for the choice of ovulation induction agents in women with PCOS, while the previously suggested letrozole as the first line therapy only for the women with BMI more than 30, but now they have recommended letrozole as a first line therapy for all PCO women irrespective of the BMI. The miscarriage rates are similar with the two therapies. There was no difference in birth weight or rate of neonatal complications, including the congenital anomalies, and the twin pregnancy rate was lower with letrozole as compared to the clomiphene citrate. Although high order multiple births would not be anticipated with letrozole, the first case of sextuplets with letrozole ovulation induction has been reported. So be cautious when you are using letrozole. Because of paucity of time, I am not going to tell you the details of this case, but it is there and published because of letrozole. They have sextuplets. Side effects are there, but they are very minor side effects. And what about the fetal safety when you are using letrozole? A study comparing the incidence of congenital malformations in 900 newborns of women who conceived following treatment with letrozole or clomiphene, they did not find a statistically significant difference. A follow-up study did observe a significant increase in low birth weight infants with use of clomiphene, and infants born after use of letrozole were similar in birth weight to infants who conceived spontaneously. Now coming to the gonadotrophins, the recombinant. Now whenever we choose gonadotrophin therapy, there are many questions that which gonadotrophins we should use as far as non-IVF cycles are considered, because we have HMGs, purified HMG, urinary FSH, highly purified FSH, and recombinant FSH. So this is the study which says that you can use any gonadotrophin and it does not affect your pregnancy outcome. This is the study which is said that though recombinant FSH is registered in countries, their use is not advised for ovulation induction. So what are the factors you should consider when you want to use the gonadotrophins? You have to consider the cost, the expertise required for the intervention, the degree of intensive monitoring, implications of potential multiple pregnancy, the risk of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and you have to choose the most cost-effective gonadotrophin should be used. There are two major problems with gonadotrophin therapy, that is multiple pregnancies and ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. So when you are using gonadotrophin therapy, your aim of ovulation induction should be the formation of a single dominant follicle, which is very challenging as far as gonadotrophin therapy is considered. And what should be the starting dose? It is decided based on the age, AFC and AMH, and of course if she has already undergone a previous cycle with gonadotrophins, you have to see what was the response in that cycle. The conventional protocol is starting 150 milligram if she is less than 35 years and non-PCO, and if she is PCO, you can start safely with 75 of HMG. So this is in a nutshell how you can monitor the gonadotrophin's IUI cycle. From day 2 you are giving, day 7 you are doing TVS, and on day 7 if you find more than 10 millimeter 2 to 3 follicles, continue with the same dose. If there are 4 to 6 follicles, you can continue with the same dose or taper. But if there are more than 6 follicles, you have to look for OHSS. If you see a follicle less than 10 millimeter on day 7, you have to increase the dose. And when lead follicle is more than 18 millimeter, you have to trigger for stimulation. There are various other protocols when it comes to gonadotrophin cycle. Now, whether to choose CC or letrozole with the gonadotrophins, and what are the advantages of combining these oral agents with gonadotrophins? Yes, you will get higher rates than with CC alone. It becomes cost effective. You get less chances of multiple pregnancy than with gonadotrophins alone, and low chances of OHSS as compared to the conventional regimen. And if you are using oral agents along with gonadotrophins, then in a nutshell, you have to start day 2, 3, 4, give CC or letrozole. Day 5, 6, add gonadotrophins to your oral agents. Day 7, 8, give gonadotrophins. And day 9 and onwards, you start doing your ultrasound and do dose adjustment as was already discussed in the previous slide. Is there any role of antagonist when we talk of IUI cycles? Yes, you can use it, but the indications are few and limited. If you want to convert your IUI cycle to IVF cycle, that is you have got too many follicles and patient agrees to get converted into IVF cycle. If you want to program your IUI, that is you want to avoid the weekends intrauterine insemination, you can use antagonist, and there are two protocols for using antagonist for IUI cycles. Monitoring, we all know, but I want to tell you when to cancel the cycle. When you are doing TVS monitoring and you see 3 or more follicles larger than 15 mm, stimulation should be stopped, SCG should be withheld, and use of a barrier contraceptive should be advised in order to prevent multiple pregnancies and ovarian hyperstimulation. The risk of multiple gestation is definitely increased as compared to gonadotrophins if you are using gonadotrophins. OHSS, whenever you are using gonadotrophins, everybody should be well versed with ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It can be mild, moderate or severe, and we should know how to manage everything that is mild, moderate or severe in case it occurs. But we are not justified in having ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, because I have already told you when you should stop the cycle and cancel the cycle. What about the cancer risk, that is ovarian cancer? In some early studies, it appeared that fertility drugs was associated with neoplasia, particularly borderline ovarian tumors. But subsequent studies and meta-analysis have not confirmed an excess risk of ovarian cancer with infertility treatment, whether it is clomiphene or gonadotrophin therapy. But in some reports, infertility itself was an independent risk factor. The best evidence for a lack of association comes from a systematic review of 11 case control studies and 14 cohort studies that included a total of 1,82,000 women, and this analysis, there was no convincing evidence of an excess risk of invasive ovarian tumors with fertility drug therapy. What about the risk of breast cancer? There does not appear to be an increased risk of breast cancer in the woman treated with fertility drugs. What about the risk of other cancers? In a retrospective cohort study, neither clomiphene nor gonadotrophin use was appeared to be associated with an increased risk of melanoma or thyroid cancer or cervical cancer or colon cancer. Is there any risk to the offspring when we are using ovulation induction agents? A large population-based study found that childhood tumor risk was not increased in those children who conceived following ovulation induction protocols. So friends, to summarize my talk, the method of ovulation induction selected by the clinician should be based upon the underlying cause of anovulation and the efficacy, cost, risk, burden of treatment and potential complications associated with each method as they apply to that particular individual woman. For oligoovulatory women with PCOS who are undergoing anovulation induction, letrozole is the first line therapy over CC regardless of the patient's BMI. This is grade 2B recommendation. For obese women with PCOS, lifestyle changes and weight loss is an initial strategy to reduce the ovulatory cycle, again grade 2B recommendation. So friends, it is not what you give, it's the way you give it. Thank you so much for your patient hearing. Thank you.